Okay, hello and welcome to 40 Tips and Tricks for Spring and IntelliJ IDEA. My name is Yann Cebron. I work on the IntelliJ team. I'm responsible mostly for the Spring Framework support there. And I'm happy to have Stephane with me. Would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Stephane from Pivotal. I'm working on Spring Boot and Spring Framework. And I'm also working with Yann on the tooling support.
Yes, so today this talk is about not only mastering the IDE, in that case IntelliJ IDEA, but also since we are working very closely together, we are going to look behind the scenes. So we are going to try to explain why certain features are available in the IDE, why did we build them, and how can you use them effectively, of course. So I hope you're going to learn both about the IDE as well about the Spring Framework features we are going to demonstrate today. And that's basically the only slide we have for today, because now we are going to the IDE and we are going to do 45 minutes of live coding. And we have a short project prepared for that. I will post the URL to that later on Twitter if you want to try it yourself at home with the sample project we are doing today. But first, we have a few questions for you. So who is using IntelliJ IDEA as their main IDE right now? Okay, that's like quite a large majority.
80%.
Anyone using SCS Spring Tool Suite? Okay, only a few.
Yeah, 5%. NetBeans?
Okay, the one guy with NetBeans is also in the room. Who is using Spring Boot? Okay, that's quite a huge number already.
Okay.
We are going to do some Spring Boot stuff in the last bit of the talk. Stephane already did a thorough introduction this morning. So now we are going to start with Spring Framework itself, the core features. We actually have some content about the XML configuration support. We are going to drop that completely today because we have only so much time. But you can read the script online and you can try to figure out what kind of features we have there. So, when I open the Spring Tricks project, it's going to be bigger very soon, but for now we have to start low resolution because of that little bugger here in the lower right corner. So I opened a project which has Spring Framework stuff in it. It has configuration files or configuration classes in it. And the first thing that IntelliJ does is, when opening such a project, is run through all the project files and check for any configuration files it can find there. And it notifies us with this Spring Configuration Check startup notification about unmapped files. What are unmapped files? So for any kind, or for most parts of the frameworks we support in IntelliJ, you need to configure so-called facets. Facets are basically metadata about specific frameworks, about specific libraries or whatever, which are attached to modules which are part of the project. So the IDE can understand how the framework is configured. So in this case, we have to use the Spring facet to tell IntelliJ how the Spring support is configured, and why can't that be automatic?
Yeah, so it can't be automatic because any project, any configuration is different really, and you can't really take all the configuration classes that you have in your project like that. Fortunately, if we look at Spring Boot, a Spring Boot or a Spring MVC project, typically, we can infer what the context should be, and we do that. Well, IntelliJ IDEA does that automatically. But for a project that doesn't use such infrastructure, like the project that Yann is using here for demonstration purposes, then you have to tell IntelliJ IDEA what the configuration classes in your project will be, because there's so many ways to have, there's so many ways to configure a project really. It is very important for you to do that, because if you don't configure the Spring facet, basically you lose pretty much every Spring support in IntelliJ IDEA. You might not notice because the IDE is already very smart on its own, but it's even smarter when you configure the facet. So first thing, if you're using Spring and IntelliJ IDEA, when you go back to your desk, open your project, open the module configuration, and make sure that the Spring facet is configured there.
Right. So it tells us that it found 12 configuration files which are not mapped into any Spring facet yet. We can click on here, we can see the list, and I'm going to open the first one we use for demonstration, the main configuration class, and now I can finally move into presentation mode so that you can actually see what we're doing with the code. So the first thing you notice here is that this main configuration class name is highlighted in yellow. It's also shown in gray, which is the default highlighting for unused classes or unused stuff in IntelliJ. So, and we get this pop-up when we hover about it that it's not used and the application context is not configured. Actually, I forgot to, no, I did enable it. So you are going to see tooltips with the shortcuts I'm using in, sorry, down here. These are the default shortcuts. You can see the one for Mac and in brackets the one for Windows. If you want to pick up some shortcuts today, that's a good chance. So back to the unmapped configuration. The default workflow for fixing stuff in IntelliJ is to use intentions, and they are available by using the Alt-Enter shortcut while I'm with the cursor on the element which is problematic in some way or another. And we can see the first intention is already to create a Spring facet. So I'm just going to hit Enter, and it will open the facet setting for me. We see some stuff already there. We are going to talk about this later. I will just close that dialog for now. And if you noticed right now on the left, we saw a bunch of icons appearing here out of nowhere. And this is just because now IntelliJ knows that I have a Spring facet, so I want to see some Spring features in the IDE. We still have a problem with this class because it's still highlighted yellow. And that is because we didn't add it to any of the file sets. So what is a file set?
So file set is a collection. It's a collection of configuration classes that are used in a given use case. So you may want, for instance, depending on a certain context, to load a certain part of the configuration or different part of the configuration. And you need to reflect that in the IDE configuration as well. So you can't, if you have, of course, if you have a simple case of every configuration file in the project is being loaded, always, then it's very easy. You just create one facet, one file set, you put everything in it, and it will work. But if you have more advanced use cases where, depending on the environment, you may choose different things, then it may be wise to create different file sets. In most cases, you only have one file set with everything, because as we will see later, if you're using profile, IntelliJ IDEA understands that and gives you nice assistance about it. Mm-hmm. The icon, the gutter icon on the left, is also a good indicator that something is right about that file. So if you open a Spring configuration file in the IDE and you have no gutter icon whatsoever on the left, it's probably because IntelliJ doesn't know about it.
Okay, so we need to set up some kind of file set. I have to tell the IDE to which group of configuration files this main configuration class belongs to. And again, I'm using the Alt-Enter shortcut to invoke the quick fix menu. And we have the quick fix available to configure the application context here. We don't have any application context existing where we could add this file to, so we have to create a new one. I'm just leaving, or I can rename it. I can give it a speaking name to find it later. And we can see that the main configuration class is already pre-selected here as a member of this file set. Clicking OK, we get even more gutter icons. So if you love gutter icons, you gotta configure this stuff. And now we are ready to show Spring features in this class, really.
So in the purpose of this talk, we'll have several facets because we want to separate the samples that we show to you. So we don't want some configuration files to conflict with others, so we will create multiple file sets here. But keep in mind that it's really an advanced feature, and if you have a regular application, a regular project, you most probably will have only one file set.
Yeah. Okay, so we are actually starting with taking a look at the gutter icons we now have on the left. And the first one I want to show is this one. And always hover over them to get some tooltip. to get some information so we can navigate to Spring Bean declarations. And that is because this component scan is there to define Spring Beans by annotations, by scanning the class paths, finding classes with a certain annotation set, and adding them to the bean context. And the nice thing is that you really have intelligent support in all these attributes, because the IDE understands that this is actually a reference to a package name in this case, but you can also click on this icon here and you get the list of resulting beans. So if I change this package name, the list of beans is likely to change and you will have a different result in this pop-up there, okay?
So this is a very good way to make sure that component scan is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. Instead of starting the application.
You start the app and then it doesn't work. So yeah. it goes even the feature is even more extensive than that. If you add a new component in that package and you made a mistake, whatever the mistake can be, and you try to inject that in another component, IntelliJ IDEA will tell you, hey, I don't know about this. So you'll get immediate feedback about, as soon as the facet is configured properly, you'll get immediate feedback about what you're doing live without starting the app, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So that's pretty obvious, this feature. Another nice thing to note is that it also works for meta-annotations. What are meta-annotations?
Meta-annotations is something that's not new in the framework, but with Spring Framework 4, we've been starting to use it more extensively. So meta-annotation is a way for you and us to create an annotation that defines multiple aspects. So for instance, if you look at request mapping, you all know probably about request mapping, the Spring MVC annotation that maps a method to an action. Then you can provide the path that the action should reply to. You can specify the HTTP methods to handle, etc., etc. In Spring Framework 4.3, we've created a set of meta-annotations around that, for instance, called get mapping. So get mapping is actually request mapping with the get HTTP method. There's also a post mapping, a put mapping, etc., as you might expect. So meta-annotation is about crafting an annotation that's really meaningful in your case. So for instance, if you want a service that's transactional all the time, some kind of transactional service, you may create a meta-annotation for service and transactional, and you'll get both aspects working by default. In this case, what we want to showcase is what happens if for whatever reason you wanted to craft your own component scan annotation. Again, it's not something you would do usually, but it's just to show the power of the IDE.
Right, so this is my custom meta annotation. I am extending or modifying the default component scan annotation, which is found here on my annotation here. And we can redefine or redeclare existing attributes of the component scan annotation here using ELIAS4. That's the standard mechanism that Spring uses here. And again, don't be shy. Press Control Space anywhere in the IDE and try to get some completion. And you will be astonished in what places you get actual completion here. Because we specify the annotation here and we know the type, the string array here, IntelliJ will automatically provide all the matching attributes from the component scan annotation, which could be redeclared. So they need to be string arrays and they need to be not used yet in my meta annotation. So that's a very nice feature. Now, when we go back to our main configuration class and I disabled the original component scan annotation but enabled our custom, again, we get the same feature set here for our custom meta annotation. So IntelliJ really understands this hierarchy and remaps the attributes to the corresponding original attributes from the Spring component scan annotation, and all the features keep working.
There is still a red thing in that file.
Yeah, but we are going to look at this in a second because I have another cutter icon I really love.
Oh, no.
That's this one here, Spring model dependencies. So we told you need to configure file sets. Why is that? Usually, or most times in real-world applications, you have a quite large hierarchy of configuration files. You have some kind of entry point configuration files, and then you have lots of related configuration files where you externalize certain aspects of your application. And we set up some fake config here, of course, so we have this import annotation here to import additional configuration classes, which are just listed here by their class name. but we also have import resource to import XML configuration files. And again, you get auto-completion here. I can jump to the file. So that's very nice. But what happens at runtime, right? So you have all this set of related or imported configuration files. What is it going to look at runtime? And this Spring Model Dependencies pop-up is actually a nice way to find out about this, because what it does is to show the graph of the configuration files just as it is defined in the source code. So you can see the main configuration here, and you see all these arrows going away from that. That's all the different imports we have, going to the other configuration classes, but also going to the XML file we just saw, which in turn imports another XML file, which in turn has another component scan, which triggers some more configuration files. And that's stuff that is really hard to understand, especially when you come into a new project and you don't know what is like the structure in this configuration to visualize this. And you can do it right from your IDE and inspect all the relationships. You can select a node, you can go there and have a look at it. So that's very nice to understand the structure of your Spring configuration.
So let's break it, no? Can you break it?
I think we can break it, yeah. So when I uncomment this duplicating component scan here, and I go back to my graph, we get some more errors here, and they are red. So what happens? IntelliJ detected that we have some cycle here, because the same configuration files are component scanned twice, and that's something you don't want to do, because it's wrong, and it will cost you startup time at minimum, and probably result in some kind of
side effects.
Yeah, side effects or runtime errors, or maybe even the application would not even start. So that's a nice way to check stuff like this. So I need to comment it back again first. So Stephane really wanted to talk about this one here.
Yes.
So auto-wiring is something which should be pretty much known to everyone in this room. It's basically about Spring matching bean candidates to their proper injection points. And we can do this by type, by name, by various other means. And apparently it has a problem finding a bean of type long, which I want to auto-wire here in my configuration class. And again, when I hover over this, IntelliJ is actually inspecting my context, my configuration files, collecting all matching beans and finding out, oops, there's actually more than one bean that would match by type. So that's not going to work, right?
No, that's not going to work, because we can't take the decision for you. We can't. Which one are we going to inject? We can't take a decision of choosing one, because that might be not what you want, and maybe it may also hide an error in the configuration. So the way to fix this is to actually give an extra hint to the container. Just tell it, this is among the ones that are available, this is the one I want. And again, every time you have such a thing in IntelliJ, there is a magic shortcut that Yann already showed several times. Just use it again, and then it may propose, and most of the time it will propose something meaningful for that problem. In this case, it's adding a qualifier, so which is a Spring feature to say, these are the candidates that I have, and I'm going to choose which one I want to inject here.
But maybe first I want to see what candidates I really have. So there's another intention below that, which is show bean candidates, and that shows up every time you have multiple possible matching beans. And when I invoke that, I can just see the list of beans that are possible candidates for that point, and which we need to declare further. And there's one shortcut which I really, really like, which is quick definition. And you can use that shortcut basically everywhere in the IDE, whether you are in the code editor, whether you are in some kind of pop-up list like I am right now. And what it does is open this nice pop-up showing the definition of the actual element your cursor is positioned on. So you don't need to jump to that file to inspect, okay, what is behind this? How does it really look like in code, right? Because I can't see this from this list. I just see the name and the type and the configuration class, but I don't see the actual bean definition. And you can invoke the shortcut basically everywhere to just take a quick look at the element and making the decision, yeah, that's the right one, no, that's not the right one, without leaving the current context. So that's a huge time saver for navigating stuff or inspecting stuff. So now I'm going to use the other quick fix to add a qualifier.
And choose which one. So again,
yeah, basically I can choose any of the ones IntelliJ knows about, and now the warning is gone. So, and we get another icon here, which shows that we can navigate to the auto-wired bean. So IntelliJ understands all of this. I can go there, and I can even go to the usages. So I can navigate back and forth between bean and auto-wiring injection point. There's another yellow thing here. Now the auto-wired is still yellow. And let's look what it's going to tell me here. Field injection is not recommended. What is this?
So this is something we've been advocating for quite some time, and I'm very happy that now the IDE has an explicit inspection for it. Problem with field injection really is the life cycle of your bean becomes a bit inconsistent, and it's not super nice for testing, especially if you want to test without Spring, which is a nice thing to do if you can do it. The main problem with field injection is the injection is going to happen after the constructor has been invoked, because we need an instance to actually set the field. So if you try to use the field in the constructor, you'll get a null pointer exception, which is really, really weird. And if you try to use that object without Spring, you won't be able to actually set those values, because there might be no constructor to actually pass the value. There is no requirement to create a constructor to pass the value. So again, if you go there and you use the magic shortcut, you'll get an help from IntelliJ, which is to create a constructor. And if we do that, you'll see that it will create a constructor and pass along the qualifier information so that you can, it even put the field final. I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, that's nice, very nice.
It's quite smart about it, because we don't want to modify any injection points after calling the constructor, because that again violates the whole purpose of constructing an object and injecting the dependencies in the constructor. So now it's still yellow, but that's just because the sample code is not actually using that field, so we can ignore it from the Spring side point of view. We have done the best thing we can do, and all using intentions. So please don't do this manually. It's a lot of work to write all this code manually. Just try Alt-Enter to fix those things automatically.
So there is this change profiles thing on the upper right.
Right.
What does it do?
So what it does is show a dialog. Apologies, it looks a bit distorted in presentation mode. It does look pretty nice in real resolution. But yeah, first maybe you want to explain what Spring Profile is.
Of course, yeah, of course. That's my part, I know. Yeah. So profile in Spring Framework is a way to load a certain set of configuration file according to a name, according to the fact that a profile is enabled. A profile is basically named. So for instance, you may have a development profile and a production profile. And when the development profile is enabled, you want certain things to be configured, like an in-memory database, for instance. And when the production profile, you want to create a data source on some kind of production database. Also, you may want, with a development profile, to create mock to remote services, because they're not available on your local machine. But you still want the IDE to know about those things and to tell you what's going on. So enabling the profile in the IDE is basically telling IntelliJ IDEA to apply that profile to its logic of parsing your config, and making sure that when you want to inject something, you'll get a link to the thing that matches the profile, basically.
So, and it's as easy as just enabling the checkboxes for the profile or the profiles I want to activate now in the IDE. So that's like the pretend like we are in production with profile ABC, and show me all the warnings and errors just like they would be at runtime with the chosen profiles. So when I do this, I actually get a new error here. And
that's not representative of the discussion development production, of course, because
but it's a nice showcase of switching profiles, because what's happened here, we moved away from the main profile, which had two candidates, right? When it could not decide to choose between the two long beans, and we had to add this qualifier. And now, of course, the name of this qualifier is not valid anymore because in the custom profile we just activated, this bean does not exist. So when I press Control Space here, I actually get the only other bean which is now visible in the IDE according to the custom profile we have activated, and that is the custom profile long bean, so a third bean matching by type. And I can fix the name, and I know that everything will be correct again. So that's basically all about profiles, very powerful if you want to switch between different environments. And you can simulate all these effects within your IDE without deploying to production and seeing what fails at runtime. So that's a huge time saver again.
Next is what we want to show you now is how the IDE can assist you in things that we have documented, but it's not especially easy when you start working with a certain feature to know about that stuff, and getting a live feedback in the IDE directly is very helpful. And one of them is caching. So caching, you can see a basic configuration there with Spring Framework. It's basically adding an aspect on your bean, such as whenever you invoke a method on the service, Spring Framework will compute a key based on the arguments, and will look if there is a value in a cache with that key. And if there is, it will simply return a value, not invoke your method at all. And if there isn't, it will invoke your method, and before returning the value to the caller, it will set the value in the cache, so that next time you invoke the method again with the same arguments, well, we don't invoke the method, we just use the value in the cache. And initially, maybe we can show the sample where the cacheable annotation is set.
Yeah, first again, to remind you, again, this configuration is shown in yellow because we didn't add it to any file set, so before we can actually make any use of the features. Again, I'm using the Alt Enter shortcut to bring up this, and now we get actually the other already existing file set as proposal to just add this configuration to it, but I don't want to do this. I don't want to mix those two contexts, so I'm quickly creating a new one, giving it a decent name, and now it's ready to work in the IDE. So let's go and take a look at the actual caching features.
Right.
Yeah.
So you get a warning here about the annotation being put on an interface. Really, the caching aspect is an implementation detail. You don't want to drive that to all your implementations, because one implementation of that interface may perfectly choose not to use caching. So it's always better to put those aspects on your implementation, and the IDE will warn you about that. Of course, you may disagree, because whatever your use cases are different. In that case, it's very easy to disable the warning if you don't agree with it.
Okay, so I just disabled it on the interface and adding it back with a few more attributes to the actual implementation of that service.
And then you get another inspection that tells you, I don't know what cache to use for that thing. So if you look at the code, it's basically, taking a start and an end. We can see that because there is no key generator. Oh, there is a key generator, actually. Yes, okay, yeah. So it's a sample that's a bit more complex. If you forget about the key generator thing, it's basically going to compute a cache key with the start and the end. And if there is a value, it will use that as the cache. And it will return a list of integer in this simple case. Yeah. But we need to know in which cache to put the value, and there is no information there. The thing I meant to say initially about the IDE assisting you when new features are introduced is previously the name of the cache was mandatory, so it was an attribute on the annotation, and you had to provide it. If you didn't, you'll get a compilation error, so you knew that something was wrong because it wasn't there. And in the meantime, the community asked us to improve the cache infrastructure, and namely to bring more powers as to where to determine which cache to use. As you can see on the top, there is now a class level annotation where you can share settings. So you could say that you could put the cache name in that area, and if Yann just uncommented that, and now the warning is gone. But you could also have a cache resolver interface that you could implement, and you can programmatically decide which cache to use based on the method invocation. So there's plenty of options. Long story short, that argument can't be mandatory anymore. We can't do that because there's so many ways to configure it. So OK, fine, we put it optional. But if a newcomer or someone who's not aware of that feature come and start using this feature, no warning, nothing, and you run in and it blows up because it doesn't know which cache to use. So the fact that the IDE gives you those warnings is very, very nice.
Mm-hmm. OK, so that's a bit smartness about all the Spring caching framework stuff. And now I actually want to go a bit deeper in the Spring expression language stuff, which we have here in the condition attribute. So the condition attribute actually allows me to build runtime conditions for this annotation. And we can see that we have a start and end parameter here at this method. And we get the proper autocompletion here in the SpringEL expression. So IntelliJ knows that this attribute is a spell expression, and it knows that using the cacheable annotation, I can make a reference to the parameters of this method and a few other things. So that's built-in knowledge of IntelliJ to help you writing proper spell expressions here. And not only does this work for the cacheable stuff, but we can also take a look at this class here. So we have, for example, the pre-authorized annotation from Spring Security, and again, you have a very smart autocompletion here, so it knows about built-in roles, and you can also use the methods which are available on the root context of this annotation. That's a feature that Spring Security provides out of the box. But of course, if you don't remember the proper method names or the method parameters or whatever, you can just press Control Space and have all that information right here. You can, of course, use the documentation shortcut here as well, and even navigate there so you can see what the method really is about. And so, long story short, spell is context sensitive, and the IDE knows what is available where and gives you proper hints and completion support here.
Again, if you go on the cacheable annotation on the condition attribute, you'll see that the Java doc has a bunch of things that you could use. It's a huge description of, OK, these and these and these are available with those names. And the fact that the IDE knows about them means that you can just use autocompletion and discover the features that you can use in that particular context.
Right. So we are, again, running out a bit of time. So
yep.
We are switching now to Spring MVC. And we make a short step back to the very beginning where we told you that you need to set up file sets. And there are two exceptions to that, which is Spring Boot and Spring MVC. If you follow the standard setup mechanisms which are made available from Spring MVC. So if we open the Spring facet here, we can see two MVC contexts, and they have this short text auto-detected here. So that is something that the IDE understands just by placing the stuff in your project. This is a Spring MVC context, and it follows the standard ways of configuring Spring MVC in the framework. So I can just do it for you, and you don't need to take care about this. So we don't need to touch it, and you actually can't touch it, and you should not touch it. And just a very quick look at the Spring MVC features here. So we have a controller class with two request mappings. Again, my favorite thing here, a gutter icon. Actually, if you are annoyed by some gutter icons, you can switch them off in the editor settings. There's a special tab there to enable and disable all sorts of gutter icons there if you want to customize it. But this one is really nice because what we have here is a model in view returning to some view page, in this case an JSP page. And the name of the JSP page actually refers to the actual JSP file, because IntelliJ understands all the setup you did for Spring MVC. So it knows how to resolve that view name to the corresponding view file. I can control click there. And I even have autocompletion there for all the model attributes I put into my controller. So I can even go back to the attribute here, and I'm going to the exact definition of this attribute which I'm using in the view. The same can be used by this gutter icon here to go to the view, but how do I return from the view to the controller? So there's another shortcut which is very general and which works in many, many contexts, and that is navigate related symbol. And when I do this, it actually brings me to any kind of related thing. So you have code, you have configuration files, you have view templates, you have any sort of semantic relationship, and it will offer you either a list of possible targets which are somehow interacting with the current element you are on, or just jump to the only one which happened in this case. Another nice thing is that we really understand special features in Spring MVC, like for example path variables. So these are dynamic parts of the URL we can use from the controller, from the request mapping here. So again, we have resolving here for the parameters. I can even use rename refactoring, and it will fix all the things for me. So the IDE really understands what Spring MVC is doing here again. It's not just text or not just code. There's a lot of semantic knowledge behind this, and you can just rely on this even for refactorings. Very quick look in the Spring tool window. So we have two targets here, one for Spring Beans and Spring MVC. So the feature I used was select in. And select in allows me to select any currently focused element in any of the tool windows. I can open it in the project view, but I can also open it in any of the other tool windows, which makes sense. And in this case, it makes sense, of course, in the Spring MVC view, because this is a controller and it has request mappings. So when I do this, I get actually the Spring MVC view of my project, right? So we have all the controllers here in the left, and we have all the request mappings of this controller here. We can see the documentation if we had any, or we can, for example, see here the associated path variables for this request mapping. So that's a shortcut to remember. If you want to find something in any tool window, just use select in. Very nice way to navigate back and forth.
There's also a way to directly go to an action by selecting the path in the URI. Can you show that?
Yes. So, of course, any of these items in the list are navigatable, so I can just hit enter and I open the editor at this point. But maybe you just have the URI and you don't remember where is it actually defined, what controller, what request mapping. And the feature to use there is go to symbol, which is basically the go to anything that matches by name somehow. And the matches by name somehow can extend actually to frameworks, in this case to request mappings. So when I type /, I get actually all the request mappings in my project. And then I can type further if I had more results, click here and I go there. So that's a very nice way if you get some exception report from a JSP, from some browser, from some user, and you need to find a controller, very easy to find it this way.
5 minutes for Spring Boot.
Ooh.
Go.
Okay. So Spring Boot is some very nice thing. We can't introduce it now. It would take a bit more time. But the key point is it's very easy to create projects using Spring Boot, and it has a very powerful auto-configuration mechanism, and it has a dedicated project wizard here in IntelliJ. It's actually more or less the same as we have on start.spring.io, but it's all built into the IDE, so you don't have to go to the website to use the features. And
it's the same service, so basically the wizard is an abstraction on top of that service. What you're going to do there, ultimately, IntelliJ IDEA is going to contact start.spring.io, get the project from the service, and just configure that for you. Right,
so what we have here is a long list of different dependencies we can select. We can also search here. For example, if I search for cloud, then I get all the matching starters here. I can select them. I can remove them again from my shopping bag. For now, we are just going to use the web dependency. I can check all my selected dependencies here on the right, and then click next. And
you're going to create it in the trash, really?
Yeah, that's my default work folder, where everything ends up one day or another. So it just downloaded this project template and unpacked it for us, and we have now a basic Spring Boot application here in a few seconds after it downloaded some more stuff from the internet, because Maven likes to do that. And it also... Here we go. Okay, come on. There it is. So what you see here, all the gutter icons are already there, and that the case is that because the Spring Boot setup will be done automatically. So that's a big exception. You don't have to add the Spring facet manually. You don't have to set it up again. It's auto-detected here. So you can just use the Spring initializer and you have a ready-to-run application. I can just hit Shift F10, it will compile, and it will start the Spring Boot application, ready to rock, right? No setup, no writing POMs, no stupid work, basically. And so what can we show in the very little remaining time? I guess one nice feature is that when you want to add new dependencies to your application, you can of course go to the POM XML or to the Gradle file and add them there. But another thing is that there's a lot of like well-known annotations, and when you type one or two of them, like for example, enable WebSocket, what will happen is IntelliJ knows where this comes from, what starter is related to this, and it will add you a quick fix, again, Alt-Enter, to add the WebSocket, Spring Boot WebSocket starter to there, and you're ready to continue, right? And the same is true for a few other key classes which are often used, so you don't need actually to touch any of the build system's config files.
If there are classes that you want to use and they are not detected, you should tell those guys and they will add that to the list.
Yeah. That's very easy to do, actually. Sorry, I think the last thing we can show in the remaining time, Spring Boot is basically using auto-configuration, so there's lots of defaults. If you want to override some of these defaults, you need to give it a configuration file, either application properties or application.yaml, and yeah, you need
to know all those keys, right?
You need to know, yeah. So what can I configure?
Plenty of keys, yeah.
And even more, the keys, of course, depend on the imported starters, because I can't configure anything from WebSocket if I don't have that starter in my project. So it's highly dynamic. And you have a very nice auto-completion here for all the configuration properties. This is discovered dynamically, so it's really up to date. This stuff is going to be there at runtime. And for example, we have auto-completion as well for many, many values, even going to smart stuff like detecting properties which have a special type or special meaning, like charset, booleans, of course.
Enum, you should show enum, maybe DDL auto. DDL auto thing, if you type DDL.
Let's see if we have that.
Yeah, this one.
This one, for example.
No,
yeah, well, that's nice too. So it knows about predefined values for some of those keys and stuff like that. When I try to write something that doesn't make sense, you will get immediate feedback. So again, don't do errors by using non-powerful tools. Trust the tools, just use auto-completion and use the built-in validation to prevent wasting time.
You also have deprecation informations. For instance, if you type role without S, role, R-O-L-E, yeah.
Yes. No, that's not deprecated.
You're not using 1.4?
I can use one of the really deprecated ones, like, for example, velocity. No one wants to use velocity anymore.
There's no replacement. There's no replacement for that one. So the idea we're trying to make is if there is a replacement because the property has moved or we expanded it, then again you use the magic shortcut and IntelliJ will propose you to migrate your property to the new name. So what's nice about that is if you have a configuration, quite complex configuration, you upgrade to a newer version of Spring Boot and you open your configuration in the IDE, it will tell you which one has been deprecated without even you looking at the release notes. So you get immediate feedback about what might have changed that you are actually using.
Yeah. So maybe the last thing we can quickly show is the Spring Boot run configuration. It was created automatically on importing the project, and it has some specialized features for making it easier to work with Spring Boot applications here. This is the Spring Boot specific part of the run settings. So we can enable debug output by just checking this box. We can hide the startup banner, which Josh really hates me for adding this feature. We can add the active profiles we want to have in this project, but we can also add dynamic configuration properties. So again, when I press Control Space here, I get the same list as I had in my application properties file. I can then override some specific properties without touching the configuration files, right? So I can run the application locally with a different set of configuration properties, and I can just take the default one configuration, create a copy, modify all the properties, and just have some A/B testing, or just run it against a different database, run it against a different web server by overriding some of the configuration properties here. And I don't need to touch any of my config files, which is dangerous and time waste. So that's a nice way to try out and debug Spring Boot applications locally.
One more thing before we end up is all the auto-completion for keys that you've seen, you can also do that for your own key. So if your own application exposes keys, there is a very easy way for you to have auto-completion for those keys if you want.
Yes, yeah. Unfortunately, our time is up. Otherwise, we would be happy to show that. Yeah.
Maybe a question right there if you have some.
Yeah.
Sorry, we don't have time.
So,
thank you.
Thanks so far. And maybe if you have some more questions, please find us here or outside. We're happy to give you more answers. Thanks.